Let me tell you something, baby, sometimes the smallest sentence can shake your whole spirit. And when a child looks you dead in the eyes and says, Grandma, don't wear your red coat today, you better believe that message is coming from somewhere deeper than fashion advice. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that his tiny warning was about to save me from a storm I never saw coming. Well, sugar, gather round because Auntie May's gonna tell you a story that's got a whole lot of heart, a little mystery, and a big old dose of God's gentle protection. You see, life has a funny way of sending us messages, sometimes through thunder, sometimes through whispers, and sometimes through the innocent voice of a child who still has one foot in heaven and one foot on earth. So when my sweet little grandson tugged on my sleeve that morning and said, Grandma, don't wear your red coat today. I didn't argue. I didn't fuss. I just listened. And Lord have mercy, later, I understood exactly why. Now let me break this down for you. 6 lessons, 6 lights, 6 reminders straight from Auntie May's kitchen table. When I look back on that morning I can still feel the soft tug on my sleeve and see those big innocent eyes staring up at me with a mixture of worry and seriousness that no child his age should ever have to carry. My sweet little grandson was standing there with his shoes half untied and his hair sticking up in all directions like he had run straight out of a dream and into my kitchen. He took one look at me, then at the red coat hanging on the chair beside me, and that is when he said those words that would echo through my mind for the rest of the day. Grandma, do not wear your red coat today. At first I thought he was being playful because that child loves to tease me about my clothes, and especially that bright coat that he always said made me look like a superhero. I smiled and asked him why not, baby. But he shook his head very slow and very firm, almost like he was hearing something I could not hear. Grandma, just do not wear it today. Please. There was something about the way he said please. Children do not use that word with such weight unless they feel something deep inside their little spirit. I had raised children and grandchildren and I knew their tones better than I knew the sound of my own breath. This was not a request for fun. This was not a playful moment. This was my grandson warning me about something he could not explain. And though I could not understand it at that moment, my heart recognized the kind of truth that only comes from innocence. Children still see the world with fresh eyes. They feel things without trying to make sense of them. They speak the truth without polishing it or softening it or covering it with big fancy explanations. They live closer to instinct than adults ever will because their hearts have not yet been weighed down by the noise and doubt that we gather as we grow older. So I listened. I listened because I knew that sometimes God uses the tiniest voices to whisper the biggest messages. I listened because I felt a little chill move across my skin even though the house was warm. I listened because something inside me said, girl, you better pay attention. You asked God to guide your steps and now He is sending a message through the very child you pray for every night. So you better not ignore a single word. You see, baby, grown folks forget to listen. We like to talk. We like to explain. We like to think we know everything because we lived long and survived long, but sometimes the youngest person in the room is the one carrying the clearest vision. Children do not doubt themselves. They do not second guess what they feel. When something moves their spirit they speak, and they speak boldly even if they do not know why. My grandson did not know the danger I would learn about later. He did not know what could have gone wrong. He did not know the trouble that was walking around our neighborhood. But he felt something. Something told him Grandma should not wear that red coat today, and he delivered that message with the honesty and urgency that only a child could bring. I looked at him standing there with that quiet worry in his eyes, and I did not ask another question. I just reached for the old brown sweater hanging on the back of the chair. It was plain and simple and dull next to that bright red coat, but I put it on anyway because sometimes wisdom is not about what looks good. Sometimes wisdom is about what keeps you safe even when you do not understand the reason. As I buttoned the sweater I saw my grandson relax. His shoulders dropped and he let out a little breath he had been holding without even knowing it. He did not have to explain anything. He just needed to know that I listened. And oh my child, listening is sacred. Listening is respect. Listening is love in action. Listening says I trust that. Your voice holds meaning even if your words do not come with explanation. When you listen to a child you tell them that they matter. You tell them that their spirit has value. You tell them that God can use any vessel He chooses, even one that stands only 3 feet tall and still sleeps with a stuffed bear at night. When I left the house that day wearing the brown sweater instead of my red coat, I kept replaying his little voice in my mind. Grandma, do not wear it today. His warning wrapped itself around me like a quiet shield. I walked slower. I paid more attention. I felt more aware of the world around me. It was as if his words had opened my eyes to something just outside my line of sight. And the more I thought about that moment, the more I realized how often we adults dismiss the warnings that come from unexpected places. We brush off intuition. We silence our inner voice. We laugh at the concerns of children. We assume that real wisdom must sound mature or educated or complicated. But sometimes real wisdom sounds like a sleepy little boy standing barefoot in the kitchen saying, "Grandma, something is not right." As the day went on, I found myself grateful again and again that I had listened. Not because anything dramatic happened as I walked through town, but because I felt a sense of protection covering me. A sense that something had been prevented. A sense that a path I might have taken was quietly closed before I even reached it. And sometimes that is how divine protection works. Not with explosions of miracles. Not with loud flashing signs. But with gentle nudges. With subtle warnings. With small voices saying a few simple words that change the direction of your whole day. The more I thought about my grandson, the more I understood that innocence carries a kind of clarity that adults lose over time. Children see beyond reason. They sense beyond logic. Their hearts are still tender and open and unfiltered. They have not been taught to ignore their instincts. They have not been pushed into doubting their own feelings. They have not built walls around their intuition. When something feels off, they speak. When something feels wrong, they react. When their spirit stirs, they pay attention. That morning my grandson became a messenger without even knowing he had a message. His innocence opened a door that allowed me to avoid a danger I could not have seen with my own eyes. That is why I say, listen when innocence speaks. Do not ever brush aside the warnings that come from a child, because their hearts are tuned to a frequency we adults cannot always hear. And as I reflect on that day, I hold on to one powerful truth. God does not always send angels with wings. Sometimes He sends angels with sticky fingers and untied shoelaces. Sometimes He sends angels who mispronounce words and spill juice on the carpet. Sometimes He sends angels who still take naps and need help reaching the top shelf. Innocent angels who do not even know their voices are instruments of protection. That is why that moment stays with me. That is why His little voice became the center of my whole day. That is why I will never again underestimate the power of childhood intuition. Because that morning my grandson was not just a child talking. He was a vessel delivering a message that kept me from harm. And when a child shows that level of clarity and urgency, we owe it to them and to ourselves to listen with our full heart. When I think about obedience, I do not think about rules or force or authority the way the world tries to teach it. No sugar obedience for me is something gentler, something wiser, something that comes from learning how to trust what you do not yet understand. That morning when I reached for that red coat, my heart was set on wearing it. I loved that coat. I felt strong in it. I felt bold in it. I felt like the world looked brighter whenever I stepped outside wrapped in that bright warm shade of red. But the moment my grandson looked at me with that serious little face and said, "Grandma, do not wear your red coat today," something inside me shifted. I felt a tug deeper than fabric. I felt something speaking to my spirit, asking me to pause and listen before I stepped out into the world. Obedience in that moment was not about doing what someone told me to do. It was about trusting that voice even though it came from a child. It was about listening to that feeling that told me to respect his warning even though I did not have a single reason to understand it. We think obedience is weakness, but mercy, child, it takes more strength to set aside your own plans than it does to follow your desires. It takes courage to move with faith instead of sight. It takes wisdom to realize that sometimes your path is being altered for your own protection even if the reason is invisible. I looked at that red coat still hanging on the back of the chair, bright and beautiful like it always was, and I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. Not fear, not confusion, just a soft, undeniable knowing that wearing it today was not the right choice. And you have to understand, sugar, that is not easy for adults. We grow older and we cling to our ways. We think we know best. We think our choices must be right simply because we have lived long enough to feel we earned the right to be stubborn. But that morning I chose something different. I chose obedience not out of fear but out of love. I trusted my grandson with a kind of wisdom that cannot be taught in books or schools. Wisdom that comes straight from the heart. I pulled that brown sweater over my shoulders and I remember the sadness in my bones when I gave up the red coat even though it was such a simple thing. It reminded me of how often we fight to hold on to something simply because it feels comfortable even when God is gently encouraging us to let it go. Obedience means releasing your grip on what you want in order to receive what you need. It means making a turn you did not plan because a higher hand is guiding your steps. As I tied the sweater around my waist, I looked at my grandson again. The relief on his face told me everything I needed to know. Children do not hide emotion. They do not pretend. When they are worried, you can see it in their eyes. When they feel safe again, you can feel the whole room breathe easier. His tiny shoulders softened. His voice became light again. He even picked up his dusty little toy car and began rolling it across the table like the entire weight of the morning had just lifted. It showed me something powerful. Sometimes obedience does not just protect you. Sometimes it comforts the heart of someone who loves you. I stepped outside that day, walking slowly to the market, and the cool air brushed against my face with a feeling that was almost like a whisper. I felt surrounded by a quiet presence guiding my steps. I knew in my bones that I had done the right thing. Nothing big happened. No alarm rang in the street. No drama waited around the corner. But obedience often works that way. It is not always loud. It does not always show you immediately what danger you avoided. It simply keeps you safe without needing applause or recognition. It is the silent guardian of your path. As I went about my errands, I found myself thinking about all the times in my life when I pushed past warnings because I thought I knew better. Times when I ignored intuition because it did not come with explanation. Times when I dismissed the gentle nudge of God because it came through someone unexpected. And simple as this moment was, it reminded me that obedience could have saved me heartache many times before if only I had practiced listening with humility instead of pride. But pride is a heavy thing, child. Pride makes you believe your own voice is the only voice worth considering. Pride blinds you to divine instruction. Pride convinces you that hesitation is foolish and quick decisions show strength. But wisdom has taught me over the years that pride leads you down dangerous roads while obedience guides you toward safer ones. As I moved through town, I kept thinking about how that small moment changed the way I see obedience. It is not about saying yes to every voice. It is not about allowing others to control your choices. It is about recognizing when something greater than you is nudging your spirit. It is about trusting that God speaks through unexpected vessels, through unexpected moments, through unexpected feelings. It is about surrendering your stubborn heart long enough to let divine protection cover you. I remembered old stories my grandmother used to tell me when I was little, sitting by the fireplace with her warm hands wrapped around my own. She used to say, "Girl, obedience is not about being scared. Obedience is about being smart. When the Lord sends a warning, He is not trying to frighten you. He is trying to save you from something that could harm you." She said that in her slow, steady voice, and back then I understood it only halfway. But that morning in my kitchen with my grandson's small voice ringing in my ears, I understood it completely. Obedience is trusting that God sees what you cannot see. It is believing that something might be waiting for you outside your door and choosing to walk in the direction God points rather than the direction your ego pushes. It is understanding that sometimes the only difference between safety and trouble is one small decision. One small shift. One moment of listening instead of rushing. One moment of humility instead of confidence. One moment of obedience instead of rebellion. As I walked home later that day, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude that I listened. Gratitude that I let go of my own plan. Gratitude that God used a child to reach me. Gratitude that obedience came easier than pride for once. Gratitude that nothing happened because something unseen had already been prevented. When I reached the house, my grandson came running to me with joy in his steps, and I scooped him up without thinking. He laid his little head against my shoulder and I felt his heartbeat steady and soft. That is when I understood that obedience does not just protect adults. It also protects children who love them. It protects their peace of mind. It protects the bond between hearts. It protects the connection between generations. Because when you obey with love, you show the child that his voice matters. You show him he is heard. You show him he is respected. And that creates a foundation for trust that lasts a lifetime. That day taught me that obedience is not something to resist. It is a gift, a shield, a blessing, a sign that God is guiding your steps even when you do not realize it. Obedience saved me from danger that day, but it also opened my heart to a deeper understanding of how God works. He speaks softly, he speaks gently, he speaks through innocence, and all he asks from us is the willingness to hear and the courage to follow even when the path is unclear. Danger is a strange thing, child. It does not always roar. It does not always show teeth. It does not always announce itself the way movies and stories make you think it will. Sometimes danger moves quiet like a shadow sliding across the floor. Sometimes it waits behind ordinary moments wearing the disguise of a normal day. Sometimes you do not know you were standing inches away from trouble until much later when the truth finally comes to light. That is something I learned very clearly on the day my grandson told me not to wear my red coat. Because at the time I had no idea what danger I had stepped away from. I had no idea what could have happened. I had no idea that a single choice made with love and obedience had quietly changed the course of my day. When I walked out the house wearing that plain brown sweater instead of my bright red coat, I felt nothing unusual. The world looked normal. The sky was soft and pale. The birds were singing as they always do in the early morning. The neighbors were sweeping their porches and getting ready for the day. Everything seemed peaceful. Nothing in the air suggested anything wrong. Nothing around me made me feel unsafe. That is the thing about danger. It does not always feel like danger. Sometimes it feels like just another calm moment in a long list of calm moments. As I walked through town, I saw people going about their lives without worry. An older couple arguing softly about groceries. A teenager tapping on his phone. A mother pushing a stroller with a tired expression on her face. I moved among all of it with my slow, steady steps, thinking about what errands I needed to run. Nothing felt out of place. And that is exactly why danger can be so frightening. Because when you cannot see it, you do not brace yourself for it. When you cannot sense it, you do not prepare. When you do not know it is there, you walk right toward it with the ease of someone stepping across their own living room. Later that day, after I returned home, I learned from my neighbor that there had been a series of purse snatchings around town. She told me in a worried voice that the person doing it had been targeting older women who wore bright clothing. Women wearing colors that caught the eye. Women wearing coats or scarves that made them noticeable from a distance. Women who stood out instead of blending in. And as she spoke to me with concern in her voice, it felt like cold water ran down my back because my red coat was the brightest thing I owned. That coat shined like a signal light against the gray of the sidewalk. Anyone could have spotted me from far away. Anyone planning mischief would have seen me as a perfect target. I stood there listening to my neighbor, and I felt a deep stillness settle over my heart. It was not fear. It was realization. It was understanding. It was the calm shock of knowing that something dangerous had been close. Very close. Closer than I would have imagined. But I had walked right past it without knowing it because I had not been wearing that bright red coat. I had not been shining like a beacon. I had not drawn the eye of anyone who wished to harm me. My grandson had removed that danger from my path before I even stepped outside. That was when it hit me. Danger does not always walk up to you waving its arms. It does not always jump out from behind a corner. It can be soft, hidden, silent. Sometimes the only sign of danger is the absence of trouble. The absence of fear. The absence of things going wrong. Because someone or something nudged you in the right direction just in time. Because God whispered a warning through a voice you did not expect. Because you obeyed without knowing why. As I sat down later in my living room, I kept thinking about how easy it would have been to shrug off my grandson's words. How easy it would have been to say, "Oh baby, it is just a coat." How easy it would have been to think that children worry too much. How easy it would have been to put on that red coat anyway because it was my favorite. How easy it would have been to step outside into the same peaceful-looking street without any sense of the eyes that might have followed me. I thought about how many times in life danger had been near but I had been protected without even realizing it. Times when I changed my plans at the last minute. Times when I turned left instead of right for no good reason. Times when I felt a sudden urge to slow down or stay home or take a different path. Times when something small and seemingly unimportant shifted my direction and kept me from harm. Times when I thanked God later without fully understanding what He had done for me. Danger is often invisible. It moves in silence. It hides behind normal moments. You can pass by it without ever seeing its face. You can brush shoulders with it without feeling its touch. You can cross paths with people who mean harm without ever knowing their names. And that is why divine protection is such a miracle. Because you can be saved from things you never knew were approaching. You can be guided away from threats you never had to witness. You can be protected from storms that never reached your doorstep. Your safety can be secured before you even sense the wind shifting. When I think about that day, I do not think about what could have happened with fear. I think about it with gratitude. Gratitude that God allowed me to walk through my day as though everything were normal. Gratitude that I never had to feel the fear those other women felt. Gratitude that my grandson's voice reached me before danger did. Gratitude that a red coat hanging on a chair stayed exactly where it belonged. Gratitude that danger remained something I heard about only after it had passed me by. The truth is, child, we spend so much time worrying about visible danger that we forget the invisible kind is often more unpredictable. The danger you do not see is the one that can catch you off guard. But the protection you do not see is the most powerful of all. Because it happens before your fear begins. It blocks the path before you take the step. It shields you from something you never needed to fight. It allows you to walk in peace even when danger is nearby. I sat at my kitchen table that night watching my grandson draw pictures with crayons on a piece of paper. He had no idea how important his words had been. He had no idea how close danger had been to my steps. He had no idea that he had been my shield that morning. Children do things without knowing the weight of what they have done. They give warnings without knowing the storms they have prevented. They speak truth without understanding the depth of that truth. And God uses those moments to weave protection around you in ways you never expect. As I watched him color, I felt my heart swell with gratitude and awe. Not fear, not worry, just a deep appreciation for the quiet way God works. The gentle way He protects. The subtle way He guides. Danger may move in shadows, but so does grace. And grace always moves first. Grace always covers what danger seeks to harm. Grace always stands between you and the unseen. That is why I will never forget that day. Not because danger was near, but because I never felt it. Because it never touched me. Because God moved faster than the threat. Because a child's voice reached my ears before trouble reached my path. That is the miracle. That is the blessing. That is the beauty of how God works behind the scenes. God has a way of sending warnings in the softest, gentlest, quietest manner, child. He does not always send thunder. He does not always send lightning. He does not always shake the earth beneath your feet to make you stop and listen. Sometimes He whispers. Sometimes He nudges. Sometimes He uses the smallest voice in the house to deliver the biggest message. That morning when my grandson told me not to wear my red coat, I did not know that God was speaking through him. I did not know that a warning was being placed in front of me like a shield. I did not know that danger had already begun walking around the edges of my day. But God knew. God always knows. And He always speaks before He rescues. As I sat in my kitchen drinking my morning tea, it hit me how many times in my life God had tried to warn me before trouble arrived. How many times He had whispered to my heart and I ignored it because it was not loud enough for my stubborn ears. I remembered seasons when I felt uneasy about a decision, but I pushed my way through it anyway, thinking I was in control. I remembered moments when something inside me said stop or wait or turn around, but I argued with that inner voice because I wanted things to go a certain way. And child, those were the times I found myself in messes that could have been avoided. Not because God did not try to rescue me, but because I did not listen when He tried to warn me. That morning was different though. Something about that sweet little voice slipped right past my pride and settled into my spirit. Something about the way He said Grandma please felt too heavy, too sincere, too urgent to ignore. I did not know then that God had placed his hand on that moment and shaped it into protection. I just knew that I needed to listen. And when God sees you opening your heart to his direction even in the smallest way, he honors that obedience. He honors that trust. He honors that surrender. As I walked through town that day, I kept thinking about how God works in silence. People think miracles have to be dramatic, but baby, some of the biggest miracles come wrapped in stillness. They come in moments where you change your mind for no reason. Moments where you feel tired and decide to stay home. Moments where you reach for one coat instead of another. Moments where a child says something that feels too deep for their age. These small moments are God removing obstacles before you reach them. God clearing your path. God shifting you just a little so danger misses you by an inch instead of finding you head on. I felt that as I walked down the street. It was like I had been moved onto a different path without even noticing it. Like I had stepped into a lane where peace flowed quietly around me. I realized that if I had worn my bright red coat, maybe someone would have seen me. Maybe someone would have followed me. Maybe someone with wrong intentions would have chosen me simply because my coat called out to them like a flare in the night. But God stepped in before I took that step. God spoke through a child because children listen to him more clearly than adults do. Their hearts are open. Their minds are not crowded with doubt. Their spirits have not been hardened by disappointment. They hear him in ways grown folks forget how to hear. I kept thinking about how God sends warnings in ways that make us pause. Sometimes it is a chill running down your spine when you are about to do something that seems harmless. Sometimes it is a sudden thought that makes you turn around. Sometimes it is a dream that stays with you through the morning. Sometimes it is a small voice saying a simple sentence that shifts the whole direction of your day. We expect God to speak like a mighty ruler, but often he speaks like a loving father guiding a child by the hand. Quiet, gentle, steady. As the day went on, I realized something else. God does not send warnings to scare you. He sends them to guard you, to prepare you, to reposition you, to soften your steps so you walk away from danger before danger ever knows you were near. Sometimes when God warns you, there is no disaster at all because he prevented it before it reached you. That is the kind of protection that does not get celebrated enough. The kind we do not see. The kind we do not recognize. The kind we do not talk about because nothing dramatic happened. But nothing dramatic happened because God stepped in early. God spoke early. God redirected early. When I returned home that afternoon, I sat down on my couch and leaned back with a long, slow breath. I knew God had been with me. I knew he had wrapped protection around me long before I left the house. And I felt overwhelming gratitude. Not only because he kept me safe, but because he trusted me enough to give me a warning I could actually follow. He chose a method that would reach my heart instead of bouncing off my stubborn adult mind. He used my grandson because he knew that a child's voice carries honesty that cannot be ignored. I watched my grandson playing on the living room floor, dragging his little cars along the carpet, making soft noises under his breath. He looked so peaceful, so unaware of the role he had played that morning. He did not know that God had used him as a vessel. He had no idea that heaven had placed wisdom on his tiny tongue. Children do not understand the full weight of what they say when God is speaking through them. They just speak. They just feel. They just trust their instincts because they have not yet learned how to silence them. And in that innocence, God finds a doorway. I closed my eyes for a moment and thought about all the times in Scripture when God sent warnings long before he sent deliverance. Warnings that seemed simple. Warnings that seemed small. Warnings that only made sense later. Warnings given to people who did not understand at first but followed anyway. That is the pattern of divine protection. God sees danger approaching long before we feel the wind shift. He sends a signal, a nudge, a whisper, and when we listen we are saved from what we never have to face. That realization gave me so much peace. Because for the first time in a long while I understood that God is not only present in dramatic rescues. He is present in quiet prevention. He is present in small shifts that keep you off the wrong street. He is present in delayed appointments, in unexpected detours, in moments that feel inconvenient but are actually saving your life. He is present in the smallest warning spoken by the smallest voice. When I opened my eyes again, my grandson looked up at me and smiled with that wide innocent grin that melts my heart every single time. And I felt tears sting my eyes, not from fear but from awe. Awe at how God works. Awe at how He weaves protection around us with threads we cannot see. Awe at how He takes something as simple as a child saying, "Grandma, do not wear your red coat today," and turns it into a barrier against harm. That day taught me something that will stay with me forever. When God sends a warning, pay attention. When God uses a child, listen. When God whispers, do not wait for Him to shout. Because He does not warn you for no reason. He warns you because He loves you. He warns you because He sees what you cannot see. He warns you because His protection begins long before His rescue. And if you listen early, you will never have to be saved later. When I think about that moment when I finally understood the reason behind my grandson's warning, I realize that life often speaks to us softly before it speaks to us sharply. At first it was only a gentle tap on my shoulder. A simple request that sounded odd yet harmless. "Grandma, do not wear your red coat today." It felt like a strange choice of words from a boy so cheerful, so full of imagination, so eager to play hero in his own world. I shrugged it off in that moment, but the truth is that even small whispers can become powerful messages once the full story comes to light. That day I walked through my home with a strange sense of watchfulness. I kept turning over His words in my mind, trying to decide whether to treat them as a playful idea or a serious warning. Children see things adults overlook. They notice small shifts, tiny shadows, and spoken feelings that we grown folks learn to bury under layers of responsibility. As I moved from room to room, the red coat kept calling to me as if it was waiting for my choice. It hung on its silver hook, glowing quietly in the morning light like a flag waving for attention. My grandson had never asked me to avoid a color before. He had never acted afraid of anything on my clothing. So why now? Why this particular day? I stood in front of that coat for a long time, letting the silence of the house settle around me. I touched the fabric, feeling the soft wool, the warmth it always offered on cold mornings. It had been with me through years of winters, both literal and emotional. The coat felt safe and familiar, yet faintly unsettling under the weight of His warning. I almost put it on out of habit, but something in my spirit said no, not today. Perhaps it was maternal instinct or the simple desire to honor the voice of a child who clearly meant what he had said. When I stepped outside later, I noticed something unusual in the neighborhood. People seemed restless. A few stood on their porches speaking in low tones. Others kept glancing down the road as if expecting something. There was a heaviness in the air, not in temperature but in energy. A quiet tension that wrapped itself around the street like a fog. I clutched my purse a little tighter and walked slowly, keeping my senses open. I felt like I was stepping into the first chapter of a story I did not yet understand. I had planned to run a few errands that morning, but my steps grew slower as I looked around. My neighbor Mr. Harlow waved at me with a strange urgency in his eyes. He called out, asking if I had heard about the break-ins. I shook my head. He told me that earlier that week someone had been roaming the neighborhood searching for easy targets. They had been pulling on car doors, testing house locks, looking for anything left unattended. He said that one witness had noticed something specific about the intruder. Someone wearing a bright red hoodie moving quickly between yards just before dawn. The color had stuck in everyone's mind. Red was the signal. Red was the danger. Red was the thing everyone had been told to watch for. In that moment the pieces clicked together in my mind like a puzzle snapping into place. My grandson must have overheard the adults talking about the intruder. He must have caught the fear hidden in their voices. In his young mind, danger had become tied to the color red. And because of that he had tried to protect me in the only way he knew how. He did not want anyone to mistake me for the person they were all searching for. He did not want his grandma to walk into suspicion or closer to harm simply because of a coat. The realization sent a deep ache through my chest. A blend of love and sorrow and gratitude. How long had he carried that worry? How many nights had he listened to conversations he did not fully understand yet felt the weight of anyway? Children are like sponges, soaking in every emotion, every whisper, every look exchanged between adults who think they are being subtle. My grandson had been watching all of us. He had seen fear written in the lines of our faces and tried to shield me, though he himself was only a child. I sat on a bench near the corner store and let the truth settle. The world can be a complicated place for little ones. They do not yet translate danger into logic. They translate it into colors, into shapes, into voices, into symbols that make sense in their young hearts. When he saw my red coat hanging there that morning, he must have felt the same fear an adult might feel when seeing a sign marked with bold warning letters. To him the coat was not just clothing. It was a connection to a threat he did not know how to name. As I sat there, I felt a wave of tenderness so deep that it brought tears to my eyes. I thought of all the times we underestimate children. We praise them for their playfulness but forget to honor their intuition. We tell them not to worry, yet they watch us worry every day. They hear the news on the television. They sense the tension when adults whisper. They notice when conversations suddenly stop as soon as they enter the room. My grandson had taken all those pieces and woven them into a protective instinct strong enough to break through his usual cheerful nature. When I finally returned home, I found him sitting at the kitchen table swinging his small legs beneath the chair. He looked up at me with big hopeful eyes, silently asking whether I had listened to him. I knelt beside him and pulled him into a warm hug, feeling the pure sincerity of his little heart. I told him that he had done the right thing, that he had been brave, that he had protected me in a way that only someone who truly cares could do. His small arms wrapped around my shoulders as if he had been waiting all day for that reassurance. Later that evening I hung the red coat back in my closet, not out of fear but out of respect. It had become a symbol of something deeper than a fashion choice. It stood for the moment I realized how far love can reach even through the mind of a child. It reminded me that wisdom comes in many forms, sometimes wrapped in youth, sometimes delivered in simple words spoken with trembling courage. That day taught me that the bond between generations is a powerful force. Children remind us to see the world with fresh eyes. They remind us that care can appear in unexpected ways, through gestures that seem small yet carry heavy meaning. My grandson's warning was born of fear, but it was given in love. It was his way of saying, "Grandma, I want you safe." It was his heart speaking louder than his age. And so I carry that moment with me, not as a memory of danger but as a testament to the protective instincts that grow within even the smallest members of a family. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons come from voices that speak softly. Voices that tremble slightly. Voices that we must choose to hear even when we think we know better. When I think about that day and the warning my grandson gave me, I realize that the voices we are tempted to ignore often carry the loudest truths. Children speak in a way that seems small at first, yet their words can carry wisdom we have forgotten. That morning, when he looked up at me and said, "Grandma, do not wear your red coat today," I almost laughed because it sounded like a strange request coming from a boy who normally talks about dinosaurs and superheroes. Yet there was a weight in his eyes, a seriousness in his tone that made me stop and listen. And when I chose to pay attention, something extraordinary happened. I began to see how often the voices we dismiss are the ones carrying messages of protection, love, and guidance. I remembered all the times in my life when I ignored advice or intuition because it did not come from someone I thought was wise enough. I ignored friends' warnings because they seemed exaggerated. I ignored feelings in my own heart because I did not want to look weak or vulnerable. I ignored gentle nudges from God because I wanted things done on my own schedule. And yet, looking back, those were the times I faced unnecessary heartache, confusion, and trouble. Life has a way of teaching us that the smallest voices, the softest whispers, the most unexpected warnings are often the ones that matter the most. Sometimes God chooses the least likely messenger to deliver the greatest guidance. My grandson did not understand the danger lurking in the neighborhood that morning. He had only seen the subtle hints of worry in adults' voices. He had only felt the anxiety that comes when people whisper behind closed doors. And yet his heart had registered something deeper than his mind could comprehend. He could sense the possibility of trouble in a way that I as an adult might have missed if I had relied only on my own experience. That is the miracle of innocent hearts. They are tuned to frequencies adults often miss. They can hear things that are quiet and subtle. They can see patterns in behavior that are invisible to grown-up eyes. And when they speak, it is a gift not to be overlooked. When I finally understood why he had said those words, I felt a deep surge of gratitude. Gratitude not only for the warning but for the reminder that listening is sacred. Listening is love in action. Listening honors the messenger even if their words seem small. That morning my grandson was a messenger for something bigger than both of us. He carried a warning that protected me from potential harm, and all I had to do was listen. That is often how life works. The signs are there, the warnings are there, the guidance is there, but we have to be willing to open our ears and hearts to receive them. I thought about all the times I had doubted the value of a child's voice. Times when I had asked a question and brushed off the answer because it did not seem important. Times when I had dismissed feelings of unease or worry because adults are supposed to know better. And I realized how foolish that had been. Children carry honesty in a way that adults lose over time. Their concerns are direct. Their observations are often accurate. Their instincts are sharp because they have not yet been dulled by fear, doubt, or skepticism. My grandson's small warning was a perfect example of this truth. As I reflected on the day, I also realized that we often miss messages because they do not arrive in the form we expect. We expect wisdom to come with age credentials, explanations, or dramatic signs. We expect guidance to shout at us or make itself undeniable. Yet God and life frequently deliver messages through quiet channels, through subtle gestures, through voices that seem untrained or inexperienced, through hearts that feel rather than think. And the miracle happens when we choose to listen. When we choose to honor the warning even if it seems inconvenient or confusing. When we choose to trust that a loving God or a protective universe is speaking through a small vessel. That morning, my choice to listen to my grandson changed the entire trajectory of my day. The red coat stayed in the closet. The brown sweater kept me safe. The errands I ran felt ordinary, yet they were touched by extraordinary protection. And I realized that sometimes protection does not come with fanfare or recognition. Sometimes protection is quiet. Sometimes protection is invisible until we look back and see how close we came to danger. Sometimes protection arrives through the least expected channels and we only recognize it when gratitude fills our hearts. I looked at my grandson sitting on the floor later that day playing with his toys, and I saw the fullness of the gift he had given. He had no idea how powerful his words had been. He had no idea that a simple sentence had carried divine protection. He had no idea that his innocence had been the channel for a warning I would need to survive the day safely. And that is how life works. Sometimes the people we are tempted to ignore hold the keys to our safety, our wisdom, our growth, and our understanding. Sometimes the smallest voices shout the loudest truths if we are willing to listen. From that day on, I promised myself that I would never underestimate the value of a voice because of age, size, or appearance. I promised to pay attention to the whispers that seem minor. I promised to honor the instincts that come through unexpected messengers. I promised to look for the wisdom that exists in the hearts of children and in the subtle signals that life sends. Because when we listen carefully, we open ourselves to protection, guidance, and insight that we would otherwise miss. That promise has stayed with me. Every time I see my grandson, I remember the morning of the red coat. Every time I encounter a child speaking with clarity, I am reminded to listen. Every time life offers a gentle warning, I am reminded that the voice may come softly but the message is urgent. God works through the smallest things. God works through the quietest hearts. God works through unexpected channels. And if we are wise enough to heed the message, we are led safely through days filled with unseen dangers. That morning, my grandson did more than protect me. He reminded me of the importance of listening with humility, of trusting without needing to understand fully, and of honoring the messages that come from unlikely sources. His voice was a bridge between innocence and wisdom, between fear and protection, between ordinary life and divine intervention. And the lesson is clear. Never dismiss a voice simply because it seems small. Never ignore the words of someone who may appear inexperienced. Never underestimate the power of an innocent heart speaking truth. Because sometimes that voice is your guardian. Sometimes that voice is your guide. Sometimes that voice is the very thing that keeps you safe. And so I carry that day with me like a treasure. Not as a memory of fear or danger, but as a reminder of love, connection, and attentiveness. Not as a story of what might have happened, but as a story of what was prevented. Not as a tale of coincidence, but as a testimony of the power of listening. Children have wisdom. Children carry truth. Children can be messengers of divine protection. And the day my grandson told me not to wear my red coat is the day I learned to honor every voice, no matter how small, because it might just be the one that saves you.